start because we've got quite a packed agenda this time around. So welcome everyone to November's open meeting. As you can see, we're recording this for the benefit of anyone who's not able to join us today, although with the weather being so awful outside, I mean, who's got anything else better to do than to join us? We've got kind of a meeting of two halves, two very different topics today, which I'll introduce in a second, but just one quick kind of shout out before that I've been asked to do. Holly Dewsnip. I don't know if Holly's, I can't see Holly on the call.
I am.
You're here. Hello, Holly. So fantastic. So Holly is the chair of the DSE Sustainability Action Planning Group, and is feeling rather lonely on that group at the moment, with very few others contributing to that. This is an important agenda, it goes without saying, and Holly's group feeds into the university-wide action planning group around sustainability. So the shout out really is for anyone who'd like to join Holly on that journey and to support some of the work that we need to do in the directorate and indeed the wider university around sustainability. Please get in touch with Holly directly. You can see her there. Holly, anything you want to add to that? Was that enough of an advert for you? You're on mute, I think, Holly. You're still on mute, but right, well, no, yes, there we go. All right, you've fine. Right. So anyway, Holly is the person to contact. Holly Dewsnip. If you'd like to join her group, do please give that some thought. A little later on, we're going to hear from Richard Quayle, Head of Student Admissions and Administration. He's going to talk to us about the Student Hub project. That's an element of the Student Experience Programme, and he's going to give you a sense of what that's going to look like and where the plans are. But before we come to that in the second half of the meeting, I'm going to introduce Liz Ski and I think Tony Brown as well, potentially going to speak, who are from the Information Governance Office in the university. And I think Liz is going to kick us off in particular, but going to talk to us about a very important topic of cyber security and just some of the work that's been going on in the university and some of our own responsibilities and actions that we can take with respect to cyber. So I'll hand over to Liz and Tony, please.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that intro. And hopefully most people might have done their mandatory training on information security, data protection, which is on Blackboard. So yeah, that's first shout out. Do your mandatory training. This is sort of supplementary to that because it gives specific examples about what's going on at the university. You know, what's going on in the higher education sector with relevant examples. But I think before we start, I really wanted to just get you doing something. So if you've got a mobile phone to hand, if you could possibly open up a browser, you can do it on your computer as well, it doesn't have to be on your phone, and go to a website called menti.com. That is MENTI.com. And that should ask you for a PIN number, which I will get up on the screen for you so you can see that. And the code is at the top of that screen. If you put that in for menti.com, you should see that question that's in front of you. So we'd just like to gauge your opinions and thoughts on some quite simple questions to do with culture around cybersecurity and information security. And we can see some results coming in. This is good. It's all anonymous. We're not tracking who's putting responses in. This just gives, we've done this in FSC, in FBMH, in humanities. I've done so many, I've lost track now. So we're just gathering up thoughts on your opinions of this. And then when I've got some coming in, I'll go to the next question because you can't move on, I don't think, till I move you on. Do you worry about becoming a victim of phishing attack?
I'm watching the numbers go up. These questions.
This is good. I'm getting lots of replies here from DSE staff. That good one. I'll keep going because I know we've got quite a lot to get through. And then, do you agree with that statement?
Oh, look, our purple.
Good. Oh, that's looking interesting.
Very healthy.
Then, would you know what to do? How confident do you feel? Usually a mixed picture, this one, from our previous meetings. Yeah, it's pretty mixed. Yeah. And then the final question, aside from formal settings and training, how much do you sort of discuss information security? Again, quite mixed. Yep.
Low numbers, though, looks like a more difficult question.
Yeah, I think it might depend on your role and your job. Okay, that is very helpful. So we'll take those and we will sort of have a look at how it compares across the university as we try and shape future awareness, training materials, etc. So I'll come out of that and I'll go into what I'm covering today, which is an awareness session on cybersecurity. Just move you out of the way. There we go. So I should up, hopefully, for everybody. Okay, so we've done that, which is a sort of quick culture check on where we're at. But what I am looking at today is cyber resilience at universities, who's attacking us, why are they doing that, and that incorporates external cyber threats and then what's going internally and accidental things that happen. And then we'll look at ways you can defend yourself. That last bit we could spend ages on. So what we've thought of, just focus on 4 things. If you do nothing else, you do these things, and that would help and go a long way to protecting yourself and protecting information at the university. So where are we? You probably noticed in the news, universities have become a bit more of a target, particularly the past 3 years. There's a few headlines there, places you'll recognise. Some of them you'll have heard of. You might not have heard of all of those, but the one I will just pick out is Maastricht University. So it's about 3 years ago, they had to pay a ransom to some Russian hackers because they took their systems offline. All of their business critical systems, mail servers, file servers, all got hit, and all of their backup servers. So they were completely disabled. They couldn't do any work, couldn't do any teaching and learning work. It was a bit of a problem for them, and so it was a bit of a warning really across the sector. And they did a very honourable thing, I think, and they held a symposium about it. So they got an IT company to come and find out what happened, do the sort of digging around, and after that they held a symposium for lessons learned for other universities, which was great because other places don't tend to do that. And they found a few things. I think it's all started with a phishing email. They concluded that security updates weren't properly managed, they weren't done, and offline backups weren't kept of various systems. So it was a bit of a warning for the sector that this is becoming more of an issue. So who's behind the attack? So in the UK, the National Cyber Security Centre is the government body that's responsible for cybersecurity, and they started warning universities back in September 2019. And everything that's in this presentation is something that they would fully endorse, and they gave permission to use some of their materials for this. So they want to raise awareness across all sectors, particularly higher education, because we're a target. We contribute to economy, skills development, innovation in the UK. We handle a lot of personal data, a lot of research data, IP. I mean, it's endless amount of valuable data that universities have. And that's attractive to foreign governments and nation states looking to steal that sort of thing for strategic advantage, etc. Not to mention criminals just wanting to disrupt systems and get a ransom for data. So just sort of any sort of financial gain they'll be working on. And then finally, there's sort of the staff and student side of things where it might be an accident that things happen, or it could be intentional with a disgruntled member of staff or student. It does happen. So why do they target universities? Well, I've mentioned a few already: high value research, lots and lots of bulk data on students and staff that could then be used to set up fake bank accounts, resell the details online, that sort of thing. They only really need to target a few individuals to steal or con money out of the university or a supplier. Supply chain quite often quite vulnerable in it for universities. And we're also very open and outward facing. And that's one of the reasons why universities are successful, but also why they're a soft target, because we collaborate across borders between academics, and that's a soft target for cybercrime. Older institutions such as this one, likely to have quite a lot of old equipment, software that's more vulnerable to cyber attacks, and of course, it's a busy place. People are focused on teaching, learning. They're not thinking cybersecurity every day. So there's just a few reasons why cyber criminals would target university. So going a bit deeper into each one, nation state actors. So they are certainly targeting universities for this sort of data, particularly research and particularly STEM subjects. They're also after bulk personal information, our documentation and our standards, sort of technical resources, that sort of thing. And it can be quite untargeted as well, these sorts of attacks. So good example would be the WannaCry ransomware attack that was attributed to North Korea, affected the NHS badly, but it wasn't specifically targeted at the NHS. It was just because they had a lot of vulnerable Windows devices in the NHS. So moving on to a case study that relates to universities. So this is around stealing information from libraries. So it just kind of goes to show the efforts that cyber criminals will go to try and get data out of universities. So a few years ago, IT researchers discovered about 300 fake websites and login pages for universities across the world and in the UK. So the way they set it up is that the victims were directed to a fake website by email, first of all. So it would be a link in an email. They then stole their credentials on the fake login page, but then got redirected to a legitimate university page. So it's quite clever, and you sort of probably wouldn't suspect that, really. You're just sort of logging in and you end up in the right place. But in the background, your credentials have been stolen. And it just kind of showed the appetite for stealing IP. It's not quite clear what they got as a result of all of that, but they were trying, let's put it that way. So online criminals.
Liz, just to come in there for a second, just to bring just a piece of reality to that. We had 3 in-scope people in the University of Manchester. At that point, I got a call, as did a few other people, to go and check 3 particular accounts for 3 people. So it's not just could happen, might happen to someone somewhere, nowhere. That was quite a challenge to work out for those 3 accounts what had happened, and we'll leave it there. But just to say, it's real. It's not something that just happens to somebody somewhere else.
Yeah. So online criminals are there to make money and are good at identifying what can be monetized. So they'll try and steal university data and block access to systems, and then demand a ransom to get the information for you to get the information back. And they'll look for weak processors and target members of staff that authorize payments. So it's that sort of thing that goes on. I probably don't need to go into more detail there. We'll go to another case study. So This is an example from a school. I think it was a secondary school that this happened. So someone tries to call up pretending to be from the Department of Education and asking for details. The heads of finance sends nice targeted phishing email to them that they click on, files get encrypted, spreads through the network, and then they demand £8,000 for decryption. So that sort of thing could quite easily happen anywhere and does happen anywhere, but it was just quite an interesting one, pretending to be from the Department of Education. So internal cyber threats. So we often think it's all coming from outside, from what have you, but we do also have a bit more of an internal insider threat, and rarely it will be a disgruntled member of staff, or it could be a student that wants to hone their hacking skills. So there is that internal threat here, particularly in universities where people move around quite a lot, and universities in particular aren't the best at things like joiners, movers, leavers processes. And I know in the past at universities in the UK, there's been sort of visiting academics or collaborations going on that might not have gone through formal routes. And so from a cyber perspective, that makes you pretty weak. People on placements that they funded themselves and all sorts of things, where it's just really quite hard to keep track, which does pose a threat from an information security perspective. So internally, another one, let's have a look at a case study around password managers, or password management rather. So this is from a school where the pupil was able to access their management information system because the teacher had left their password out, probably on a post-it note, somewhere. So they managed to use that password, and they discovered that the teacher had reused that password along for other systems, so could quite easily start getting into other systems with lots of data on and lots of pupil data stored on there. And it did result in quite a major breach for that school that ended up getting reported to the Information Commissioner's office. So it does happen. Yeah, do write your passwords down and stick them on a post-it note. So another one, so accidental cyber incidents. We do see a lot of accidental incidents at the university, not necessarily cyber, but more sort of data breaches. So information going to the wrong people by accident, information down the bottom of an email chain that shouldn't have gone to various people. So, or information put on an unencrypted USB stick that's then stolen. We've had that before and reported those sorts of incidents to the ICO. It just happens. So, and I think it's important to ensure that there's no fear of reporting, because that's worse. It's much better for us to know what's happening, so we can try and deal with it, than if we don't know what's happening or people are too scared to report. So yeah, that's the sort of accidental type of thing that goes on quite a lot. So moving on to how you can defend yourself. So, I mean, phishing, most people know what phishing is. It can be targeted or untargeted. It can be by email, but it doesn't have to be. It could be through social media. It could be through other means. So typically it's email, or could be text message, phone calls, whatever. So it's just about being wary and thinking something not quite right here. Why are they asking me this information? Why do I have to click on this? You know, it's just thinking around, taking a step back and not rushing with anything like this. So a lot of this is in the online training around phishing, and you know, it's becoming more of a thing that people are now aware of. So it depends on your job. A lot of people have information out there about them online, on the internet, so you are more of a target for sort of spam and phishing if there's a lot of information out there about you. But I think it's around thinking about the techniques that people use, so you're less likely to fall for things. So pressure to act is a big thing. Sometimes it's rubbish spelling or grammar, but it doesn't always apply. But I think it's more if it just doesn't look right. Remember JDLR, just doesn't look right, then it probably isn't. And don't be too embarrassed to ask for help or report if you've clicked and thought I shouldn't have clicked, what have I done? But one good thing at the university that's been implemented recently that you won't know about because it's just happening in the background is something called Proofpoint, which is an email security platform. So that is working behind the scenes to protect against a lot of phishing and other dodgy content that's coming in. And there's some figures there from just 1 week of Proofpoint in action, which is great. But phishing will always come through because that's the job of a of a cyber criminal. They'll be trying to tweak things so that it gets past things like Proofpoint. So you'd never be completely fail safe. Passwords. So yeah, I think this is always a topic that people love, depending on whether you're working computer science or not. But passwords is still used for most things. You know, we all have so many passwords for different systems and have to remember lots of them and have them all unique and what have you. So yeah, what can we say? So longer passwords are always stronger, but it will depend on the system, and you will have to just look at whatever rules they've set around upper and lowercase and all of those things. But general advice is to like avoid the really commonly used passwords. You can go on to haveibeenpwned.com, which is on that slide, and see whether your email address has ever been involved in a data breach. So you could put your University of Manchester one in there or your personal email addresses and have a look for that. And it'll say whether or not it's ever your accounts have ever been breached. So you can reset passwords and what have you that way. It's always quite interesting to look at that. Avoid ones that have been, so that's really all around just being aware of your sort of main accounts, whether it's University of Manchester one, your emails, personal email ones, your Amazon and eBay and Facebook, and all sort of ones where it would be a bit of a nightmare if your account was hacked, and not to reuse any passwords across those sort of bigger, more sensitive accounts. If you've just signed up to a website where you're just getting a newsletter, that's not a really critical account, but there are obviously other ones that are more critical. So you just need to be a bit more careful with those passwords. So that's kind of covered off there. Keep your work one separate from any others. To most decent services will offer two-factor authentication. So whether it's a PIN or a number that comes on your phone to sort of verify your account, always a good idea to have that enabled, particularly with social media. Storing them securely. So this is where everyone says, how do I do that? Well, most people, well, certainly the NCSC would recommend using a password manager, and they've got advice on their site about that, which is fine. It's just thinking around what do you want it to do. It will generate passwords for you. It will keep them very secure in an encrypted vault, and all you have to do is remember one very long and very strong password. You're stuck if you forget that password, but overall it's a lot better. I don't think I could cope without a password manager. So there's plenty out there as long as you're looking at what you wanted to do for your own personal life and how you want it to work, if you've got several devices and what have you. So it's just worth looking to see how they've been peer reviewed. Ensure they're obviously from a legitimate app store and not just randomly off the internet. But there's advice on that I can send through from the NCSC if you don't already have password manager. Securing the devices, yeah, goes without saying. So make sure software gets updated. Don't take apps off the internet. Make sure they're from some form of shop, whether it's Apple or Google Play or wherever. I mean, it's not a guarantee of security, but it's better than just downloading random things from unknown vendors. Protecting your device, definitely need I would say at least 6-digit PIN on a phone, or some people use Face ID, fingerprint ID, depending on your device. But you have to have some kind of security on there, and then just physically protecting it, remembering where it is at any particular time. And then finally, yep, if in doubt, call it out. Just report anything suspicious. I've got a slide coming up that kind of covers all of this, which can share these slides as well. Report things, don't assume someone else has, and don't be afraid to challenge. You can send emails to phishing@Manchester AC UK, and always worth having the IT service desk helpline in your phone, rather than wondering how you're going to contact them when you've lost access to things. So there's information on there that should help direct your inquiry to the right place, who to come for help, and who to report problems to. And now I've canned through that. We can take any questions, or Tony can chip in with any additional thoughts he might have.
Yeah, I was just going to chip in. Thanks, Liz. Just before we open it up, the key to it from an information governance point of view is, once we've kind of got everybody thinking about the cyber risk, our aim and our kind of little advert for the information management project that we're leading in information governance is the first point on here, really, which is helping colleagues to understand what information they've got, what they ought to get rid of or can get rid of to avoid risk in the first place, how to classify it, how to recognize what it is, and how to label it and look after it, and just generally provide a human layer. Lots of layers are the way we overcome cyber criminals and activities. By having layers, one of them hopefully will catch the level of sophistication or the motivation of a criminal gang, or even if we're making a mistake, we sent something to the wrong person, or we sent a workbook instead of a spreadsheet. So our aim is really just to work with colleagues to help understand how we can manage information in a better way and work together on that. I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Liz and Tony, for that. Thank you. And stop sharing the screen as well. So just open it up. We've got a couple of minutes just before we turn to Richard. Does anyone have any particular burning questions they want to ask Tony or Liz? You can either raise your hand or put them in the chat. Ian, please.
Thank you. It's not a question as such, so Liz and Tony can relax on that. But I just thought it was helpful for colleagues just to sort of flag up a couple of things around information governance. I know it's not the most exciting subject, or that most people don't find it that exciting. I'm not claiming that I do, but across the DSE and across the university, we have a system of information governance guardians and information governance coordinators. So hopefully for the majority of people, those people doing those roles are taking on the load in terms of information governance work. Now, in some areas, we're reviewing exactly who are doing the information governance coordinator roles, but hopefully people should know at least who their guardian is in their area. If there is a problem, just do talk to other colleagues within the DSE who can assist with things. We do have a network of the guardians across the DSE. What I would flag up, because I know quite a few people have raised this, is about how we share documents, how we save documents at the moment, particularly when there's messaging around about the movement away from P drives, G drive, movement away from G drives, shared drives, the use of Teams, the use of SharePoint, etc. And apart from just ignoring my phone, which never rings, except there'll be someone. This will be someone. I should take this actually. This is probably telling me that my Amazon account has been used and £400 has been withdrawn. So it's very probably important that I get to it and ring them back and give them my bank details. But
calm under pressure as ever, Ian.
But I managed to talk out the phone ringing, so that was good. But what I want to flag up, we have picked up on this, and we will be looking to share information, working with colleagues in the Information Governance Office over the next month or two. So don't necessarily worry too much about that, but we will be sharing that so that we've got plans across the DSE. And you might have noticed as well that we are on occasions trying to share information governance messages through the team brief as well. But if there are questions, issues, things that people particularly want us to flag up, then do either let me know as the chair of the network across the DSE, or your local information governance guardian, if that's not me anyway. But we do want to highlight key things, because sometimes people can get a bit nervous about has there been a data breach or things like that. Or as I say, particularly at the moment, how do I share documents? How do I send passwords? How do I do this, that, and the other? Because I think we all want to avoid having any sort of data issue, because that is the nasty end of the work. But hopefully most of the time we just follow the guidance and everything works according to plan. No one is able to hack us because we've kept ourselves secure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ian. We'll let you go and get the phone, which sounds rather like your neighbour's burglar alarm, actually. But anyway, thank you also to Liz and to Tony again for joining us. You're welcome to stick on the call or go and do other things. And so, change in topic for the second part of the meeting, and I can see he's sitting on the screen in front of us, Richard Quayle. So Richard's head of student admissions administration in Student and Academic Services, and Richard is going to talk us through the very exciting Hubs project that's a component of the Student Experience Programme. Richard is chairing the group that's taking this concept forward, but he will fill us in a bit more. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Simon. And happy to follow Ian's question when Ian looks like he's got a very distinct halo above his head. So I don't know if that's an information governance halo. A bit of a step change, as Simon mentioned. So I'm going to talk about the student support hubs today. Just as I step up to my dispatch box, someone else somewhere is stepping down from it. So if you've been following the news, there's a bit of a step change. None of that is important. The important thing really is that Neighbours is coming back. They're bringing it back, and it's going to be on Amazon Prime. So I'm sorry, Simon, I've stolen your ending note from this week's brief, but I just thought I'd note that as a really important piece of news for today. So talking about the student support hubs, as Simon said, I'm Richard Quayle. I'm one of the product owners. It's split between myself and Carly Pisapati, who's the head of teaching, learning, student experience in the School of Engineering over in FSE. And the student support hubs, as they're now called, are a product of a bit of research that was done as part of the Student Experience Project programme, where we figured out that there was 110 contact points across the institution that ranged from full-on desks to offices, or people who know something can have access to a certain system type thing. Obviously, that's supremely confusing for students to navigate, and part of simplifying the university's structures is having a look at that and seeing what we can do to streamline those support functions at that front end. So the Student Experience Programme very much took this as part of it. So lots of the structures have all been designed with student support hubs baked in, and this is a bit of a wordy slide, but it gives you an overview of what the original proposal was with it. So we identified the number of gateways, we identified the need for enhancing services and support, and how people access them, navigate through them. And there were a couple of key principles that we wanted to bake in right from the beginning, which was any student, any hub. So any student should theoretically be able to go to any hub to start their inquiry. And that we go to the student. So we try and take services more close more closely to where they're spending a lot of their time physically. So if you're in over an MBS, you don't necessarily want to trek across campus to go and access a different service. And that very much, that approach of how can we use the hub for that is where we want to get to in the longer term, which I'll talk about in a little bit. What it again gives us is the opportunity to consolidate a number of existing contact points and think about the role of central university services and how they interact with students. But it's absolutely not just bashing together a load of school TLSE services and hoping it works. This is all very intentional work to unpick and understand journeys and systems and processes to make sure that they're really fit for purpose and they're able to serve students in a way that we would want to in 2022. So again, key objectives: provide a consistent information that's more accessible and easier to navigate for students. Building a bit of a community of practice as well. We've got lots of very talented staff around the university who have a huge amount of knowledge. How do we build on that? How do we understand some of the areas of good practice and spread them out into the other areas? You know, that's been a challenge even within schools. So spreading it across the institution is one of the key drivers that we want to extract out of this as well. And then finally, and most importantly, is around technology and some of the digital solutions. That's clearly going to underpin a lot of the work that we're doing, readying ourselves for the future and making sure that the experience that we're giving students is what they would expect. There's still a long way for us to go in some areas, and Hubs is helping to drive a lot of that work. But you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. So what would it look like? Now, I've dragged off some stock images from the internet of different locations to give you a bit of a flavour of what we're talking about. So you know, you're seeing bright colours, light, airy, you know, that sort of atmosphere. But the way that people access, it's not necessarily just going to be a reception desk. It won't necessarily just be a Genius bar in Apple on the top left, nor will it be the Aston Web Student Hub, which I think I've stolen from Aston University, shout out to them, where they've got check-in or self-service kiosks. It's likely to be a mix, but importantly, each school is likely to have something that is a little bit different. That's partially to do with their own evolution as a school, and also responding to the demands and particular designs of their programs and their makeup of students. But what we're keen to do is set overarching principles. So whilst they may all be glitzy and glamour in due course, come January and you know, the early part of next year, some will be open, some will probably not be open by that point, and all of them are on a slightly different journey, but this is sort of the destination of where they're heading to. That does lead us to thinking a little bit about timescales. So what we're talking about here, we've been talking about hubs and broader SCP for quite a while now, and it's nice to be able to show a bit of a slide with some more firm timelines on it. So from January 23, we're going to be going live with some of our foundational work. Now, when I say foundational, I've got a next slide which will kind of cover that in a little bit more detail, but it's a bit more of what we need to get our house in order for some of the processes. It's not some of the really exciting, juicy stuff that's going to take a little bit longer to develop, but it's going to establish sort of very core service functions that are going to be consistently applied across the university. And from January is the key bit. Some are already open. So if you go over to FSE, there's 2 hubs over there. There's another one as well hiding around somewhere else in the university. We've got a bit of a job to get them to a position where they're consistent with everyone else, but broadly, they're already in operation. Some of the other areas, we've got a little bit more work in sort of estates and building work type thing as well. So through to January 24, January 25, as we move further forward, there will be more of an impetus on things like self-service and digital solutions, which will help students resolve their query and access the information before they even have to think about where is the nearest hub for me to go to, or can I, you know, fit in a visit to a hub in my school while I'm on campus. And just giving you a little bit more info. I mean, some of this is a little bit technical. I just thought it would be really helpful to again give a flavour of where we're at. So There's a couple of streams, and you'll see at the bottom digital tools sort of underline and underpin a lot of this work. It's really vital that we get those systems. So it's great to be able to talk to this group and sort of reinforce the reasons why that's so important. But you can sort of see from January we're wanting to integrate queries that might happen at a hub or might happen in the SSC, and then over the course of the phases we'll be able to signpost better, triage better. We'll be able to respond remotely and resolve remotely with sort of a self-service element to it. But a lot of the work of the hubs on the second line is around consolidating activity that happens within schools and understanding how they can best support students with things that may be generic but actually may stretch us across the school or across a program, and how we building that knowledge and sharing it within teams within that school, because part of SEP has joined together groups based on curriculum progression, assessment and program, things like that. And some of this hubs work is really helping underpin how that is going to interact with students at the very front end. So I've talked a little bit about estates, and we've set a number of estates principles. Obviously, there's a lot of text on the right. The ones on the left are the key bit to look at. Hopefully, you're not going to disagree that these are all very commonsensical and very non-controversial, in that, of course, we want to make all the hubs accessible, safe, secure, able to have confidential conversations. They support excellent customer service and collaborative working, and they build into the sustainable agenda. Shout out to Holly and all her work, and we make sure that we are providing these on a consistent basis across the university. So these principles have been agreed throughout different stakeholder groups that have been working with hubs, including the SEP leaders and kind of SEP board and all those sort of structures. And unsurprisingly, no one has argued against any of these. Understandably, their questions are probably what you've got in your mind right now, which is, okay, Richard, you've shown me pictures of what they might look like and what you want them to look like, but where on earth are they going to be? So sort of hot off the press is a bit of a map that we've got here. Now you have to excuse the quality and the design of the map because it is hot off the press and we've not managed to get it into Google yet, and they're not all open. So from January, when we start gearing up with the hubs, more of these will come online, and hopefully by the sort of middle of next year we'll have all of these open, and I'll be able to then put in pictures and say, this is the one that's in the Simon building, or this is the one that's in Kantarovich, that I'm currently not able to do because they're not open. But as you'll see, they're spread across campus quite evenly, really. And there are 9 student hubs that cater for students in those schools. But there's also, for the keen-eyed among you, you'll have spotted the PGR hubs, which we're calling doctoral academies. And they are for primarily for our PGR colleagues to provide information and services which are more specific to the PGR experience. With all of this, there will be an impact on students, clearly, but there will also be an impact on staff and how staff work with colleagues on the front line. So that will be with our PS colleagues, both centrally and in schools. And part of the work we're doing at the moment is to understand, if a query pops up here, how do we then deal with it, or do we need to refer it? Does it need more specialist input? But it's also thinking about the academic journey within that. How do academics help students access some of this support, or how do they flag things that they might have just gone and knocked on, so and so's door down the corridor and said, oh, I've got a concern about this. How do we then facilitate those conversations? So really valuable work that the team are doing at the moment. But as you'll see, we've got a full sort of suite of different places that we're trying to stand up at the moment, but they're all at very different stages because their estates look very, very different. So just a bit of an insight into the project team. So as I mentioned, there's me and Carly. We're joined by Chantal as the senior project manager, who we've got in, Margot as our operational delivery leader, which is very SCP speak, but basically someone who's been seconded out of a school. Margot was in a school in FSE, who's really helping drive some of the change and navigate some of the issues that we're facing as a project in order to get this off the ground. Abby, who's our wonderful comms colleague, David, who's looking after a big chunk of the change delivery work. Which again is very technical, management speaky stuff, but is very helpful in terms of analysing lots of information that we're getting and putting out things where we can really tangibly get behind and start training people up, start giving them systems access, start getting them devices, all that sort of stuff that we really need to make sure that this is a success. And then Rabina, right at the end, is a consultant that we have who is very specifically looking at a lot of the queries and understanding the journey that students are having to really make sure that we're doing it in a consistent way. Now, the work that she's got is monumentally large. There's around 300 queries that we've identified through just the information advice and guidance route. We haven't really got to the same stage with SS&Ws, student support and well-being, but that's a job ongoing. But it's a huge amount of work where we've got to really delve in, get under the skin of these things that students experience day after day, and need a really good response to it. And we can't afford for a student in one school to have a different or worse experience to a student in another school, because they may live together, they may play hockey together, they may enjoy going out for nights out together and go, I'm really enjoying uni, I'm really not. And a lot of this comes to how they dealt with it the front end. So understanding those query types is really, really valuable work that we're undertaking. But that's a really quick whistle-stop tour of what we're doing as part of the hubs. I'm really interested to see what questions you've got, if there's things that I've not mentioned that you'd really like me to touch on or expand on. So hands up or comments in the chat.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you also for giving an outing to every Pantone of colour in the PowerPoint deck. Glad you managed to get quite
I
the
do
most
love a
colourful
rainbow,
PowerPoint
Simon.
presentation I've ever seen. Right, we've got a couple of people with their hands up already. I think Tony Brown was first on the draw. Tony.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Richard. So I just have a simple question, really. When you're looking across the information for the hubs, and thank you for the presentation, it's really good. Gives me a great insight to what we're doing. Do you have or does the project team have the notion of an information classification activity, i.e. restricted, highly restricted, very sensitive? If you don't worry, but if you do, that's great. And that probably the supplementary would be, have you got somebody in the IGO who's just assisting you with a project?
The answer is possibly no to both of those, Tony, but it's definitely worth us following up on. We are, a lot of the sensitivity comes around the interactions with the specialist teams within either schools or centrally. So it's definitely something we can unpick, and I'll follow up with you outside. And also,
yeah, I think that's a very specific one to follow up, I think. But go on, sorry, Richard.
I was just going to say, I think it's the first ever office that I've seen, Tony, where you've got a balcony. So kudos.
Yeah, there's nothing there.
Well, there you go. Go and pay Tony a visit. You can, he'll give you a show around his balcony. Right. Thank you for that, Tony. Kellyanne was next, and we've got some in the chat as well.
Hi everyone, thanks Richard, thanks Simon. Really good to get that overview. I know certainly members across my team have been keen to hear what the plans might look like, so thanks for sharing. My question really relates to whether there's any link there with the future plans for Uniplace. So in the drum area on the ground floor of Uniplace, we've got that big area that seems relatively unstaffed, certainly since I've been here, and I think there's a lot of questions in my area around the future of that. Who's going to staff it? What will that look like? And I guess I know it's not technically linked to a faculty or school, but could that be considered as something that we can do in collaboration with the hubs? I didn't know whether that would come up in conversation, Richard, or whether it had been disregarded perhaps as a place, because for us as a team, we've said it would make a really good starting place to have a hub in Uniplace on that ground floor.
Thanks, Kellyanne. That's useful insight. I think the strategic direction of this hub is of the hubs projects is decentralizing service provision at its core. It's moving it to providing it in a school basis. So if we think of the student services centre, that's going to be less of a focus for a student during their journey with us. We're trying to focus as much of the activity within schools as possible. And we have had some of these discussions around what is going to be provided centrally, and you know, in the longer term, I think I mentioned some of the principles, the state's principles. We've captured the ability to have confidential discussions and collaborative working with different teams, coming and working in different schools, and that's probably the direction of travel with some of this, is maybe away from central desks, more towards school-based areas.
Yeah, and in fact, that picks up Holly Sager's question in the chat as well. Holly, you've got a long memory. This is this sort of concept of hubs has been around a while, and actually those very long memories will remember that the atrium, which is on the first floor of University Place, when University Place was being conceived as a concept, the initial intention was that that would go on the ground floor, and you'd have a sort of a hub and reception area, and the need to use that ground floor for conferencing won out, unfortunately from a student perspective, which is why the atrium is where it is. So thank you, Holly, as well for your question. Just move on. So Sophie Fleischman in the chat asks, have students been involved in the planning process? If I just give you Helen Lusty's question as well, which is plays on that a little bit. What do student and staff and students feel about the prospect of the hubs? You know, what have we done to engage with staff and students to ask them about this, apart from people who are already part of SEP?
Great question. So students, we've had student representation throughout the task and finish groups that we've had, that's been really valuable in bringing that perspective to bear. We've done very focused student engagement latterly on things like the name and some of the estates principles. We've tested them using some of the links that we've got with the student communications team in marketing. When this was originally conceived, there was a whole raft, and there's a big long report on all of the student engagement that we had around this, and all the feedback that then came to design this as a concept. But we've made sure that we've continued to engage students throughout as sort of co-creators, and that has really added some value as well. In terms of staff, that's an excellent question, and it depends what their roles are, what their perspectives, what their lived experiences are. We've learned an awful lot from FSC implementing them within schools, because some of them absolutely hated it. One school even voted to close it down in the early days because they didn't like it so much, but they've come an awful long way now, and actually the feedback has completely turned, and academics really do like it. So we're using some of that live feedback of what they're like in place, as well as engaging with staff to help design it in the first place. So sort of getting it at both ends, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And just a follow-up comment actually from Holly, who asked the question earlier on about the sort of central hub concept. Holly makes it's kind of a question, kind of an observation about there being a need still for some form of central reception point for visitors to the university. I have to say I agree with that, Holly. I do think personally we missed a trick when the visitor centre that used to be in the Whitworth building was closed quite a number of years ago. You know, to move to University Place notionally, but that feels more like a shop than a visitor centre in my personal opinion. And there are some other aspects of this as well. So Student Services Centre at the moment, a little known fact, is in fact the lost property office for the university, and all sorts of weird and wonderful items get passed through there on a daily basis, which the team try their level best to reunite with their owners. So there's some of those things that need picking up from this, but certainly I would agree, Holly, and I know Rich is having some discussions around, you know, what do some of those other sort of wider visitor welcoming pieces look like?
I think, and I was absolutely going to pick up on lost property, Simon, but the other sort of exception maybe is the library, and that as a focal point for the student experience, the library is quite key for a lot of this, and we are trying to work with them to understand that a hub there is not within scope of the project, but it could be, and we could certainly support them with offering different or more consistent services with other hubs, and their opening hours are slightly different, so there would be an impact there as well, but that's all work ongoing.
We'll do two more questions, just conscious of time. Holly, thank you for the feedback on the gift shop concept at the moment as well, but I wasn't aware of that. But that's helpful for Richard and myself to know. Thank you. Anna Lomas asks, so in terms of the existing sort of front-facing student support sort of setups, we've got particularly the atrium. We heard about the atrium in our open meeting last time around. Will staff in those areas still be retained in situ, or are they expected to rotate and support the other hubs? Richard, do you want to comment? I mean, the atrium is a distinct concept from the hubs that Richard has been talking about. So, I mean, certainly we're not looking at, we still would have the atrium alongside this. I think it's probably the catch-all answer to that. Is anything you want to add, Richard?
That is the catch-all answer that I was going to add. The longer-term position is that if services such as the ones Anna helps to deliver want to offer their services out of hubs, that will be something that will be able to be facilitated, but there's clearly a bigger strategic discussion to have there about other spaces.
Indeed, and Colette, just final point, Colette Cook sort of follows up that question in extent as I think the original concept was to bring the service to the student. How will this work in practice with 12 hubs for things like careers, volunteering, USIL and so on? And again, I think it's that it goes back to the part of the question Anna was sort of raising. The hubs aren't going to be absolutely everything in terms of students. A lot of this is about sort of first line queries rather than necessarily provision of every single service and represented in every single hub in the first instance. So, you know, the atrium, as we heard last time around, is still going to be a really, really important focal point for many of those sorts of services like volunteering and careers and so on. And just incidentally, we a number of us had some really good feedback on that presentation last time around. A lot of people found that really helpful as well.
And on those, on those points, the hubs, the idea is that they would be able to take some first line queries. So how do we equip them with the knowledge about different services and different programs is absolutely something we need to figure out. And it's it's part of the long term evolve stage that I sort of mentioned is how are we taking some of these services once we've got away from some very fundamental stuff. How are we doing all this really good stuff but closer to where the students are?
Wonderful. Right, we're nearly at the top of the hour. Thank you very much, Richard. That's been really really helpful. We'll make sure all of the slides from today are available, but we will wrap up now. Richard, as a fan of the Australian soaps, clearly needs to get off and watch the lunchtime edition of Home and Away. I'm sure the rest of us have got some lunch to catch ourselves or a next meeting to go to. Thank you, everyone. We will, next month is a little bit different. We're not doing an open meeting. We have the directors' updates instead. If you haven't signed up for those, please look out again for the reminders that will come around shortly. But in the meantime, thank you very much indeed. Have a good rest of the day.